Okay, so a nonprofit CEO funded by George Soros just walked into a Senate hearing and got caught on camera defending billion-dollar fraud in Minnesota because prosecuting it would hurt Democrats. And in the same hearing, a senator pulled up receipts showing that this organization has called literally everything racist. The banking sector, racist. Algorithms, racist. Healthcare, racist. Law enforcement, racist. Even asking about citizenship on the census, racist. And then the senator looked him dead in the eye and said, the public interest isn't your interest at all. You use racism as an attempt to intimidate people to get your way. And it's not 2020 anymore. The American people are over it. And somehow, this is the guy who showed up to testify about fraud and accountability. So this past week, the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee held a hearing on massive welfare fraud in Minnesota. Billions of dollars stolen from programs designed to help children with autism, childcare, and vulnerable families. And what came out of that hearing is one of the clearest illustrations of how partisan organizations will defend fraud, deflect to Trump, and weaponize accusations of racism to protect politicians they support. Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Eric Schmidt spent about 10 minutes absolutely dismantling Robert Weissman, the co-president of Public Citizen, a George Soros-funded nonprofit that claims to fight for democracy and accountability. Take a look at this. And as usual, I'll give you my breakdown at the end.
That any Democrat politician, or let me be clear, any Republican politician that had knowledge of the fraud and was complicit should be prosecuted.
I'm not sure what they're being prosecuted for, but also in my testimony, I described also outside of Minnesota the manifold ways that this administration is enabling fraud.
Look, I understand. The reason, hold on.
The standard is that you want
to prosecute. Sir, I'm going to ask a question, and then you can answer it.
Yes, sir.
Your organization describes itself as a pro-democracy organization. I'm going to try to find out if you actually are pro-democracy or if you're simply pro-Democrat and are a partisan. We've seen the Democrats who want to change the topic. So I get you want to testify how much you hate Donald Trump. But I'm quite certain Donald Trump was not running a fraudulent daycare center or a fraudulent autism center in Minnesota. So all of the talking points about how you dislike Trump, set them aside. We will see the Democrats on this committee go down those talking points. Do you believe elected politicians in Minnesota who were aware of this fraud and were complicit in it should be prosecuted? Should there be accountability?
There absolutely should be accountability. It is not normal to prosecute government officials for not prosecuting fraud. That is not a standard I'm aware of that you've advocated or that anyone else has advocated in the Senate.
So do you think it's perfectly okay?
I did not say
if let's say Governor Walz or Attorney General Ellison knew about the fraud, benefited from the fraud in terms of bundling votes, benefited from the frauds in terms of collecting campaign finance violations, and deliberately looked the other way. You think that's not criminal conduct?
In that hypothetical, it is not okay. 100% not okay. But also, if you'll permit me, that hypothetical is in fact happening throughout.
Okay, yes, I get it. You dislike Trump. I understand you dislike Trump,
sir. It is whether I have a standard of accountability.
So let me, sir, please do not interrupt me. Please do not.
Being clear.
Please do not interrupt me. Please do not interrupt me.
Sir.
You may answer questions after I ask them. You've heard the evidence and testimony about daycare centers with no children, with no toys, with no facilities, with windows that are blacked out. Do you believe it is possible that the officials sending millions of dollars to those fake daycare centers and fake autism centers didn't know what was going on?
Well, what I heard was claims about that, and I too have watched the video. We're both parents. I'm glad that the child care centers don't open their door for someone who's knocking there. I don't view that as evidence that the child care centers are fake child care centers, although I'm sure there are some. My understanding is that state investigators have gone to do their duty at those exact same child centers and have found that most of them actually are operating correctly.
Well, I will say it is disappointing that you had a chance leading a nonprofit that is supposedly pro-democracy, to take a principled stand. Instead, you decided to defend the Somali fraudsters because it benefits elected Democrats. That's disappointing. But you know what? I'm going to give you something you're going to like, an opportunity to say all the ways you dislike President Trump, because I'm going to recognize the ranking member who will surely ask you why Trump is terrible and do everything you and he can do to change the topic from the actual topic of this hearing. Ranking Member Whitehouse.
Before we get to that, I don't want to leave what seemed to be a pretty flagrant mischaracterization of your testimony without an opportunity for you to address that mischaracterization, if you would care to begin with that.
I appreciate that. Just briefly, I was disagreeing with the premise of the question that we have been displayed this evidence showing criminal wrongdoing. Obviously, where there is criminal wrongdoing, and I testified to this, I support aggressive investigation and prosecution. To the degree there is wrongdoing in Minnesota, it should be aggressively investigated and prosecuted. I'm not sure that the claim that all the evidence we've been presented today is in fact evidence of that, but I don't deny it for a moment that it is occurring in Minnesota.
Let me ask you another question. In a democracy, is there a significant difference between private individuals engaging in fraud and self-dealing against the government and government officials, public officials, engaging in fraud and self-dealing against the government?
They are both wrong, concerning, problematic, but the betrayal by public officials is morally and from a political point of view more consequential.
Yeah, it's a worse element, isn't it? So the chairman has pointed out that President Trump did not run a fake daycare. What are the 4 or 5 things that Trump did that used his position to enrich himself and his family at the expense of the American taxpayer?
Well, I've detailed this in my testimony. Most shockingly is the report from the Wall Street Journal this past weekend about a Trump-connected business partnering with UAE in a deal that directly put $187 million in the pockets of the president and his family. He additionally has joint ventures or elaborate licensing deals with Saudi companies, companies from Qatar. He is engaged in this elaborate cryptocurrency arrangements that have made him at least $2 billion by independent estimates, and maybe even more, just in the course of the last year.
And let's look for a moment at the pardon process, which used to be operated under the supervision and scrutiny of the Department of Justice and now appears to have moved to the lounge at Mar-a-Lago. It seems that there is a pay-to-play arrangement by which people can acquire pardons. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, we've seen the president use his pardon power aggressively, and I don't begrudge him for doing that whatsoever. But what is shocking is that, leaving aside the January 6 pardons, they've been so heavily focused on those who've committed white-collar crimes, and particularly fraud.
Fraud crimes.
People who have committed those crimes, shown no remorse for those crimes, owed restitution for those crimes, or excused for restitution for those crimes, and who appear to be getting off because of their connection to the president, because they've hired high-priced lobbyists to get them there, or have made, or they or their families have made contributions to the president's political committees or those that benefit him directly.
Do you think that fits into what the public generally understands to be pay to play?
Yes, sir.
So we are now in a political environment and government in which the cops basically have been defunded or fired. The inspectors general have the job of rooting out fraud and corruption. What's the Trump administration doing if it's concerned about fraud and corruption with the Inspector General Corps of the United States?
Well, I don't believe it is concerned about fraud and corruption. I believe it's effectively advancing fraud and corruption, including by eviscerating the IG community. As I mentioned, 2/3 of the IGs presidentially appointed have been fired by this president, and the IG staffs are massively diminished in just 1 year. These are the agencies that are in charge of doing exactly what we're talking about in Minnesota. It's their job to find that kind of fraud. If there was a genuine commitment to being worried about that fraud, not for partisan reasons, but because we actually cared about fraud, we'd be, as Senator Grassley said, supporting and strengthening that IG community, not cutting it off at the knees.
My time is up, and I've paid the members the courtesy of staying within my time.
Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. American citizenship is a gift, but also a sacred duty. It comes with extraordinary rights and important responsibilities. Responsibilities are a precondition to those rights. That's why our forefathers created strict rules for naturalizing new citizens. On the front end, those who wish to become Americans must prove they are persons of good moral character and loyal to our country and attached to our Constitution. On the back end, we have the ability to revoke the citizenship of those who lie or deceive us in the process of securing it. We've seen those standards of citizenship be debased. Look at the stories of just the past few months in Minneapolis, case after case, naturalized U.S. citizens behaving in ways that show beyond any shadow of a doubt that they were never fit for citizenship in the first place. In Minnesota, naturalized citizens defrauded our government for billions of dollars. One individual stole almost $1.7 million from a program intended for poor children. Just today, a naturalized citizen in Massachusetts pled guilty to stealing over $1 million from our welfare programs. Something has to change. It's why I've introduced the Scam Act to expand and accelerate our ability to denaturalize people who should have never been
bigger than just fraud in Minnesota. Let's start with the receipts you didn't see in that exchange, because this is somehow even worse than it looks. First, let's talk about who Robert Weissman actually is and what Public Citizen actually does. Because Senator Schmidt didn't just make up those tweets, I went and verified every single one of them myself. Public Citizen is a nonprofit organization that describes itself as fighting for consumer rights and democracy. Sounds noble, right? Except when you look at their actual record, what you find is an organization that calls literally everything they disagree with racist. Here are the actual tweets Schmidt referenced, and I pulled these directly from Public Citizen's Twitter account. December 11th, 2019, Public Citizen tweeted that the banking sector as a whole is racist, not specific policies, not individual banks. The entire banking sector, racist. August 17th, 2021, Public Citizen sent out a press release declaring that algorithmic racism was a major problem and that we need to start creating anti-racist algorithms. Think about that. They want algorithms to be programmed based on race. December 23rd, 2020, Public Citizen tweeted that our healthcare system is a racist abomination. Not flawed, not in need of reform, a racist abomination. April 7th, 2023, Public Citizen tweeted that expelling 2 Tennessee state representatives for violating the legislature's rules was racism, not a rules violation, racism. April 15th, 2021, Public Citizen tweeted that law enforcement in this country has been overrun by racism. The entire institution of law enforcement, racist. June 25th, 2020, Public Citizen tweeted that racism is the reason DC is not a state, not constitutional issues, not political disagreements, racism. January 15th, 2019, Public Citizen tweeted that asking about citizenship status on the census was racist. Asking if someone is a citizen, racist. August 24th, 2020, Public Citizen tweeted, and this is a direct quote, "Defund our racist, hyper-militarized, murderous American police force. Not reform. Defund." July 10th, 2020, Public Citizen tweeted that law and order is a racist dog whistle. The concept of law and order itself, racist. When Schmidt asked Weissman if he stands by these statements, Weissman said yes. All of them. He didn't back down. He didn't say we were exaggerating or taken out of context. He said yes, all of those things are racist. Now let's talk about who funds Public Citizen. Senator Schmidt asked Weissman directly if Public Citizen is funded by George Soros, and Weissman admitted it. He said the Open Society Foundation, which is George Soros's foundation, is one of their funders. Why does this matter? Because it reveals the pattern. Public Citizen is not an independent watchdog organization fighting for accountability. It's a partisan operation funded by one of the largest Democratic donors in the country, and its entire strategy is to call everything racism to shut down scrutiny. And that's exactly what happened in Minnesota. For years, anyone who tried to investigate fraud in Somali-run childcare centers, autism clinics, or welfare programs was called racist. Journalists were called racist. Auditors were called racist. Whistleblowers were called racist and faced retaliation. And organizations like Public Citizen provided the intellectual cover for that strategy. They created an environment where pointing out fraud became more dangerous than committing fraud. Let me give you some context about what actually happened in Minnesota, because this isn't small-scale fraud. Federal prosecutors estimate that half or more of the $18 billion spent since 2018 across 14 Minnesota welfare programs may have been lost to fraud. If confirmed, that would rank among the largest welfare frauds in American history. We're talking about child care centers with no children, autism clinics with no patients, transportation companies that don't exist. One facility was registered as a child care center, but when investigators showed up, it was a liquor store. Another was a grocery store. Another was just a mailbox. David Hoke, a Minneapolis resident and citizen journalist, visited 200 of these facilities. He saw children at exactly 2 of them. 2 out of 200. The rest had blacked out windows, misspelled signs, no toys, no play areas, and no footprints in the snow during winter. No footprints. Because no children were ever there. One child care center claimed to be open 24 hours a day in a rough industrial neighborhood. Who brings their kid to stay overnight at a child care facility in a dangerous area? Nobody, because it wasn't a child care center. It was a fraud operation. And here's the most disturbing part. Fraudsters were diagnosing Somali children with autism, not because they had autism, but because an autism diagnosis unlocked access to Medicaid-funded therapy programs that could be billed at enormous rates. According to the University of Minnesota, 1 in 12 8-year-old Somali children in Minnesota was diagnosed with autism, compared with 1 in 28 non-Somali children statewide. Somali children are 7 times more likely than their non-Somali peers to receive autism treatment. Think about what that means. Think about the human cost. Telling an immigrant child that he has autism not because he does, but because someone wants to get paid. Imagine the weight of that diagnosis on parents who may not speak English fluently, who trust authority, who believe the government would never lie about their child's health. That label could follow a child for life, shaping education, self-image, and opportunity. Now let's go back to what happened in that hearing. Cruz asked Weissman a very simple question. Do you believe elected politicians in Minnesota who were aware of this fraud and were complicit in it should be prosecuted? And Weissman couldn't give a straight answer. He said it's not normal to prosecute government officials for not prosecuting fraud. He tried to make it a hypothetical. He tried to deflect. So Cruz asked him again, if Governor Tim Walz or Attorney General Keith Ellison knew about the fraud, benefited from it in terms of bundling votes, benefited from it in terms of collecting campaign contributions, and deliberately looked the other way, is that criminal conduct? And Weissman finally admitted in that hypothetical it is not okay, 100% not okay. But then, and this is the tell, he immediately tried to pivot to Trump. He said that hypothetical is in fact happening throughout, meaning under Trump. Cruz shut it down immediately. He said, I get it, you dislike Trump, but we're not here to talk about Trump. We're here to talk about billions of dollars stolen from Minnesota taxpayers by fraudsters, with Democrat politicians knowing full well what was happening, facilitating it, and harvesting votes and campaign dollars from the people robbing the children of Minnesota. And Cruz was absolutely right, because what Weissman was trying to do is what partisan organizations always try to do. Change the subject, deflect to the other side, make it about Trump instead of about the actual fraud being discussed. And Cruz called him out for it. He said, it is disappointing that you had a chance leading a nonprofit that is supposedly pro-democracy to take a principled stand. Instead, you decided to defend the Somali fraudsters because it benefits elected Democrats. Then Senator Eric Schmitt took over, and what he did was devastating. Schmidt didn't ask about Trump. He didn't ask about hypotheticals. He asked about public citizens' actual record. First, he asked if welfare and grant fraud is in the national public interest. Weissman said no, it's contrary to the national interest. Good. Common ground. Then Schmidt asked if fraud prevention is racist. Weissman said no. Okay, good. Still on the same page. Then Schmidt asked if current fraud prevention efforts by the Trump administration in Minnesota are racist. And Weissman said no. Great. So we all agree that investigating fraud in Minnesota is not racist. But then Schmidt pulled out the receipts. He said, we did a little bit of digging into Public Citizen, and what we found is that you're funded by George Soros, and you call just about everything you don't like racist. And then Schmidt read the list. All those tweets I just went through. Banking sector, racist. Algorithms, racist. Healthcare, racist. Law enforcement, racist. DC statehood, racism. Census citizenship question, racist. Defund the police. Law and order is a dog whistle. And Schmidt asked, do you stand by these statements? And Weissman said yes, all of them. And that's when Schmidt delivered the kill shot. He said, I'm really glad for this moment of clarity because what you have shown is the public interest isn't your interest at all. You use racism as an attempt to intimidate people to get your way. And it's not 2020 anymore. The American people are over it. So let me tell you what this actually means for you, the person watching this from your couch who just wants to know why any of this matters. First, organizations like Public Citizen have spent years weaponizing accusations of racism to protect fraud. They created an environment where calling out fraud became more dangerous than committing fraud. And that's not hyperbole. Whistleblowers in Minnesota were reassigned, called racist and xenophobic, sidelined, excluded from key discussions, and in some cases subjected to threats or workplace surveillance after raising red flags. Second, when these organizations are finally forced to answer questions under oath, they can't defend their positions. Weissman admitted that fraud is bad, that politicians who enable fraud should be held accountable, and that investigating fraud isn't racist. But his organization has spent years saying the exact opposite. Third, the deflection to Trump is a tell. When someone can't defend their position on the actual issue being discussed, they change the subject. Weissman tried it. Cruz shut it down. Schmidt exposed the pattern. And fourth, the American people are done with this. Schmidt said it perfectly. It's not 2020 anymore. The American people are over it. And he's right. The strategy of calling everything racist doesn't work anymore because people have seen it used too many times to protect actual wrongdoing. Here's what this is really about. It's not about Minnesota. It's not about the Somali community. It's about whether organizations that claim to fight for accountability will actually hold people accountable when those people are on their political team. Public Citizen failed that test. Robert Weissman walked into that hearing, got asked if politicians who enable fraud should be prosecuted, and couldn't give a straight answer. He tried to deflect to Trump. He tried to change the subject. And when confronted with his organization's actual record of calling everything racist, he stood by it. That's not pro-democracy, that's partisan hackery. And Schmidt and Cruz exposed it on camera for everyone to see. Before you go, if this breakdown helped you see what's really going on, make sure you like the video, subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive, turn on notifications so you're the first to know when we post, and share this with someone else who deserves the full story, not the spin.